Look at this news report from CBS News. I'm sure you've seen it all over the place. They keep repeating the story the same way. It's about that MS-13 gang member who is now back home in El Salvador after being in this country illegally for many, many years. But take a look at how they frame the story. Breaking. I love it when these stories are breaking. El Salvador's president says he won't return a Maryland man who was mistakenly deported to one of its prisons. Have you noticed it? Maryland man. He's just a Maryland man. He's just a guy from Maryland. He's a Maryland man. Our friend Chris DeGaulle, morning radio host on Salem News Channel, has put together a bit of a important image for you to stare into. Because this is what the media is doing to you. Maryland man, Maryland man, Maryland man. If we say it enough, you'll believe us. He's just a Maryland man. This guy's a Maryland man. He's the senator of Maryland, Chris Van Hollen, and he made a big announcement about the Maryland man. Maryland man Chris Van Hollen is going to go down to El Salvador to save the Maryland man because he's a Maryland man, don't you know?
I saw the comments of President Bukele, and I look forward to meeting with him. I've requested to meet with him. I reached out to the ambassador here to ask to meet while he's here. But I've also made clear if we can't meet here, I do intend to go to El Salvador to discuss the release of this individual who is illegally detained, a Maryland man who's the father of 3 in a notorious prison in El Salvador. And I believe the president of El Salvador will recognize why it's important to allow him to return to the United States of America, because it is absolutely unjust and illegal to have this Marylander detained one more day in a notorious prison in El Salvador.
He's a Marylander. He's a Maryland man. It's unjust. And there's your senator going to the mat for him to go rescue him because he's a Marylander. You know, it's funny. He said this yesterday. You know what else happened yesterday? In Maryland, in Senator Chris Van Hollen's state, another Maryland man was put in jail, just like the Maryland man, ironically, that Van Hollen is talking about here. This Maryland man was in the country illegally. This Maryland man is from El Salvador. This Maryland man has ties to the MS-13 gang. This Maryland man kidnapped, sexually assaulted, raped, and murdered a Maryland woman. A Maryland mother. Now, that Maryland mother was born and raised in America and was a United States citizen. She was married and she had 5 children. She was out jogging on a path in Maryland near her home in Bel Air, Maryland, right near where I am right now, exercising and enjoying the path, the jogging path that her tax dollars paid for as a tax-paying, law-abiding citizen of Maryland and of the United States of America. And that's when she was abducted and raped and murdered by an illegal alien led into this country, living in Maryland with ties to MS-13. He was convicted yesterday. I don't have video of Chris Van Hollen saying anything about that. I don't have any video of Senator Chris Van Hollen talking about the injustice that was done to that woman, that Maryland woman. He didn't spend any time in front of cameras complaining about the illegal immigrant from El Salvador with ties to MS-13 gang members who committed that heinous crime. He was completely silent. Instead, he stood in front of cameras and promised to go down to El Salvador to save a guy just like that convicted murderer. The only difference is we don't know that he's committed that crime, but everything else is the same from El Salvador in the country illegally, ties to MS-13. But Chris Van Hollen says he's a Marylander. He's a Maryland man. He's a father of 3. He's a Maryland man. He's a Maryland man. Say it. Just say it. He's a Maryland man. Maryland man. Over on News Nation, the same story came up. See if you can tell who's lying here and who's actually delivering the facts to the audience. Spoiler alert. The actually paid journalist for News Nation is not the one delivering truth and facts and information.
The reality is this wasn't a Maryland father. This was a El Salvadorian man who was illegally in this country, who was affiliated with MS-13.
There is no evidence to that.
Let's set the record straight about who this person is.
There's no evidence that he was a gang member.
With all due respect, if the Department of Justice has come out and said that he has gang affiliations, just like the same man who killed Rachel Morin had gang affiliations. So you would have told me before Rachel Morin's death, you would have defended that man and said he had no gang affiliations, and he went on to kill Rachel Morin. So instead of defending this gentleman, talk about who he actually is and talk about the risk in keeping illegal criminals in this country. This is exactly what President Trump was elected to do, to return these people back to their home countries, and that's what he did.
We're not defending him. I'm going to reiterate that is unsubstantiated. There is no evidence of him being a gang member. He is married to a U.S. citizen, and he was in this country legally. Okay, but we don't know if he was
being married does not make you not a gang member.
There's no evidence. We're going to move on. There's no evidence that he was a gang member, and I want to reiterate that to our viewers.
The Department of Justice came out and said there was credible evidence that he was a member or affiliated.
You said he's
with
a gang member, and he wasn't
a
legally allowed to be here. Which, again, he was legally allowed to be here, and he is married to an American citizen.
You can hold court for him all you want. He's no longer in this country.
All right.
The Americans are safer because of it.
And to go back to the original question, so right now the White House seems to be doing nothing about getting him back, and that's fine. I'm going to move on.
He's an illegal immigrant. He was here illegally with deportation orders in 2019. What part of that do you not understand?
I understand the story very well, and I'm going to stop going back and forth with you on this, but I will say, again, he had every right to be in this country. Is there any scenario under which
he was an illegal immigrant.
We're going to move on this.
No, I will not let you go forward.
Okay.
He was an illegal alien in this country with a deportation order in 2019. He is an El Salvadorian citizen. If you are not a citizen of the United States of America, here illegally, there are grounds to deport you, in which happened recently.
Again, unsubstantiated. Those are not the facts, but I will move on.
No, those are actually facts. She said he had every right to be in this country. Just so you know, if you're watching this and these facts that I'm laying out here now pertain to you, you might want to get out. If you are in the country illegally and there is a deportation order for you to be deported, you do not have every right to be in this country. So that teleprompter reader with lovely hair from News Nation is wrong. He did not have every right to be here. By the way, real fast, can you check out the chyron there? The lower third. What's the name of this topic they're discussing? Fate of Maryland man he's just in El Salvador. He was visiting and then they abducted him. He's a Maryland man. His fate is uncertain. He's a Maryland man. A Maryland man. Just keep saying it. He's a Maryland man. Great job there by Harrison Fields there, speaking on behalf of the White House. He's a deputy press secretary. Will Chamberlain has done a deep dive on this story. I commend you to check out his account over on X because he's talked about the Maryland man. He actually shows documents here, case documents, his detention from March of 2019. He entered the country illegally in 2012. Who was president then? Yeah, that's what I thought. He entered the country illegally in 2012, and he has admitted to that in open court. That is not in dispute. He is a native and a citizen of El Salvador. That means he is subject to the jurisdiction of a foreign country. Bear that in mind as you look through all of the documentation related to this case. It's not hard for teleprompter readers out there and the staff that they hire for the millions of dollars per television show to research this and have the facts. The finding that he was a member of MS-13 came up because he asked for bond, and the immigration judge reviewed the evidence and found that it showed he's a verified member of MS-13. There's your evidence. That counts as evidence when a judge takes a look at everything during a deportation hearing and says, no, we will deny you bond because you're a gang member. The immigration judge found that he was a flight risk because he had a history of failing to report. All of this documentation proves this out. 6 months later, instead of challenging the finding that he could be deported, he instead came up with a new story. He has a new claim now. He never mentioned this before in all of his court appearances. But now he says that if you send me back to El Salvador, I could be subject to torture and threats against my life. This is a protection under Article 3 of the convention. This is his documented appeal here. And this is back in, what's the date here? September of 2019. Now, remember, as Will Chamberlain points out here, he's facing imminent removal. Given the ruling of the first immigration judge, he has 2 brothers who have green cards. His fiance is a citizen. He's just given birth to a child. He wants to stay here. So he comes up with a story. And so the story is that if he goes back to El Salvador, the 18th Street gang was targeting him and threatening him with death because of his family's business. Now, he has never mentioned this before in any of his appearances before a judge, but now that he's facing imminent removal, now he suddenly says the 18th Street gang is targeting him. And this new judge, he said they're trying to extort his mother. There's no evidence of this, just his testimony. And believe it or not, people lie in court if they think they're about to be deported. I know this is shocking, but they do. They said they threatened to kill him. Now, he never reported that any of this to any of the police in El Salvador or here in America, but he fears for his life. 8 years after the fact, he says that he fears for his life back in El Salvador. That's what he testified, even though the family business had already closed down. So remember, the 18th Street gang was threatening his life because of his mother's pupusas business, which is now shut down. So if there was a threat, which is just his testimony, who knows if 8 years later that threat exists. So despite all of that, a judge said, okay, fine, you can stay. The new immigration judge, though, did not grant him asylum. So that's important. So he does not have legal status. All he was granted was a stay of deportation. It doesn't mean that that deportation order isn't still valid. It just means that a judge put a stay on that, okay? However, this guy was granted a withholding of removal to El Salvador. And again, that's not a legal right to say. Sorry, repeating myself. So that's the issue. The United States did indeed make an administrative error when they removed him to El Salvador, when there was a holding of removal to El Salvador. But that begs the question, could the administration terminate the withholding of removal? And of course they can. And in fact, they did when they deemed MS-13 a terrorist organization, because now none of that immigration stuff matters. Will Chamberlain, one more follow-up to this today. Crossed into our country illegally in 2012 by his own admission, did not apply for asylum, didn't show up in an embassy or a port of entry to go through any kind of legal process. He just entered. Authorities found him 7 years later after he'd been living in the country illegally. He was set to be deported. He asked for bond. It was denied because there was evidence he was a member of MS-13. That's when he said that there was some life-threatening situation. He says that if he was deported, then his life was in danger from the 18th Street gang. But that's the problem. There was no evidence that the 18th Street gang in 2019 ever threatened him, let alone still was a threat. He had no corroborating evidence to back up the claim. And the immigration said, okay, but the indictment here is not necessarily of the Trump administration for enforcing immigration laws. It's of our system. It's been 13 years since he crossed this country illegally. And he's finally now been determined to be returned to his home country, which he has been returned. All of that is fact. All of that is true. Everything that I showed you with the court documents is completely part of the record that any person in the media can look at right now and verify. But he's a Maryland man. He's a Maryland man. We have to rescue the Maryland man. Do you know how bad this is? I'll tell you how bad this is. This is the legal analyst on CNN. CNN, for a brief moment yesterday on Jake Tapper's show. CNN.
President Trump and President Bukele made it clear that Abrego Garcia will not be returned to the United States, despite this U.S. Supreme Court ruling saying that Trump had to facilitate his return. So are they just ignoring a U.S. Supreme Court ruling, or is the fact that the ruling was so mushy, in your words,
yes,
giving him an opening?
It's a technical term I learned in law school, Jake. Mushy. Look, they're working within the ambiguity that the Supreme Court justices gave them. They did not order the administration to return him to the United States. They said that they need to facilitate this return. They could have said, we order him returned, but they didn't do that. So you heard the Attorney General. She was being very careful in the Oval Office when she was asked, would you help? She says, of course, we'd provide a plane, right? Thereby facilitating whatever El Salvador is doing. The Supreme Court appeared to defer to the executive branch, given that this is an international matter. And you see, yes, it does look a little bit like a semantic game, but they are playing within the bounds of what the Supreme Court ruled. So no, they are not defying this order.
Bottom line, but you'll hear it everywhere. You'll hear it everywhere that they're defying the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ruled unanimously he has to be returned. You just heard it from CNN's legal analyst, that the Supreme Court did not say that. And there is nothing illegal about what the Trump administration is doing right now. While we're on CNN, you knew that this guy had to show up on this one. Watch how he lays it out there as well and explains all of this media manipulation and the hypnosis of Maryland man. And then watch how the host of the show, as usual, Abby Phillip, cuts him off right when he was making the point.
I think you guys need to understand, for the Trump administration, there's no version of this man's life that ends up with him living in the United States. Here's the way they view it. He's an illegal alien from El Salvador who came to the country illegally, who has a deportation order, who, in their view, and in the view of some immigration courts, has an affiliation with MS-13. They also believe on the Supreme...
That's not quite what it is. I think that the issue of the MS-13 thing is probably the most unclear of this whole thing. The administration has not provided that concrete evidence that they say they have, that he's a part of MS-13, and he strongly disputes in court, right? So this is not me saying it. He is disputed in court that he is a member of MS-13.
I think this is your
but I mean, it's predicated on something that is not necessarily.
They believe every.
There you go. Thank you, Newsbusters, as always. There you go. That's she cuts him off immediately, disputes it, clouds the issue, lies, because he's a Maryland man. He's a Maryland man. He didn't enter the country illegally in 2012. He didn't lie about his affiliation with MS-13. Two courts did not determine, based on the evidence, that he was affiliated with MS-13. He did not get a deportation order. He didn't then suddenly make up this idea that the 18th Street Gang will murder him if he goes back. And the 18th Street Gang is no longer around anymore. So that's not really a threat. But never mind any of that. He's a Maryland man. He's just a Maryland man. By the way, before we're done with all of this, can I just point out, I live in Maryland. I live in Annapolis, Maryland, the capital of Maryland, the oldest city in Maryland, founded in the 17th century. I know what a Maryland man looks like. That's a Maryland man. It's also Matt Foldy. And that's the Chesapeake Bay. And that's Old Bay, and that's crabs. Oh, you may see a man with crabs, which is just a rumor about Matt Foldy. I don't know if it's true or not. But when I look at that, I see a Maryland man. Keep watching the mainstream media just for entertainment purposes, but then come back here for the truth.